thank you so much for our panelists for coming today. We have a fantastic group of supporting organisations who are with us today. As an employment charity, we are grateful for their support and in working with us. So without further ado, let's meet KPMG, Ocado, Jacobs, Atkins and Citibank. First of all, can we get our panelists to introduce yourself? So first up, Jen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jen Page. I'm a director at KPMG, and I've been there for 7 years now. Prior to that, I served in the army for 12 years. I'm not from a forces background or a forces family, so it was quite a surprise to everyone, not only that I joined in the first place, but that I served for 12 years before choosing my next career. And while serving, I had postings in Germany and the UK and several deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan. I'll pause there because I think there'll be some questions later on about why I chose the particular career path I did. So I think I'll leave it there if that's okay, Johnny.
Thanks, Jen. And Rob, good to see you again. Welcome.
Hi, Rob Kelly. I'm the head of military talent at Jacobs Engineering. We're the largest engineering consultancy in the world, which is a bit of a big step for a former Royal Marine myself as a senior NCO to come and jump into. So just quickly for the intros and why I'm here and why I support the armed forces community. My job is for me to reach out and to find people like yourselves on the call today and show you Jacobs in the best light, best foot forward and all that good stuff, with the hope of trying to bring you into Jacobs a number of different roles that we have available, and we do have lots available. And the reason why we look to bring former military in is because we work in the defence sector, firstly. So it's always good to have the SME understanding of particular platforms, etc. But also we like to use that skill set cross-pollination across both sides of the UK and indeed US and Asia side of the business. And that's me.
You got the coolest Zoom background, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
and John from Ocado, great to see you. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm John. I served 28 years just over in the Royal Electrical Mechanical Engineers, went through the ranks and went for an LE officer. I work for Ocado on the Ocado Smart Platforms. So it's all the robotic engineering, 5-axis robot systems, and also a load of new design concepts and that which we're bringing in and going around the world. Job opportunities with the company at the moment, it's exponential. It's unbelievable. We're building an extra 20 sites in America that we try to recruit from, half a dozen in Australia, a couple in France. So loads of opportunities for anybody who's willing to come across to us. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And you'll see the links in the chat box as well to all the organisations. And Lindsay, good morning.
Good morning. Apologies all for my slightly croaky voice. I don't usually sound like this, but I shall muster through. So my name is Lindsay Hardley. I'm a director within Atkins, which is a technical and professional services global organisation, similar to Jacobs in a lot of ways, but obviously I would say a lot more interesting to work with. Sorry, Rob. Why am I here? So I manage our and lead our acquisition support part of our business within defence. But why I'm so kind of keen to support this event is that I'm a veteran, having served 11 years in the Royal Air Force as an engineer. Clearly I'm a woman, for those who haven't noticed. And also I'm a military spouse, so I think I ticked all the boxes today. So hopefully I can bring some of that perspective into kind of supporting this very worthwhile event. Thank you, Johnny.
Thank you very much. And Millie, good morning.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for having me. I'm Millie Webb. I'm a managing director at Citigroup. It's a financial services firm, an American bank, essentially. I've worked at Citi for 21 years. I'm head of diversity and inclusion for our institutional client groups, specifically the technology division. So I'm responsible, in addition to my day job, which is that I run a technology team. I'm also responsible for our goals as they pertain to diversity and inclusion, which includes a lot of affinity groups, such as LGBTQ and also veterans. I recently set up Citi's Return to Work scheme for people that have been out of employment for over 2 years, and we look to use that scheme to bring people back into the workforce, reskill them and give them a full-time job. We're working on how we might expand that to a veteran community. We also have a supported route directly into jobs at City for veterans. And I'm really here to speak to you about what it means to work at City and the support we have in place and why we're interested in that particular sector. I'm not a veteran, but I was an RAF cadet and I have my RAF marksman's badge.
Brilliant. You've still got it.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So if I can go to our first question to the panel. So thinking specifically about your own sector, your own business, what are the key drivers for pulling women into your industry? Is there a particular problem that you're thinking that women from the armed forces community can help you solve? So perhaps if we go to John first for a response on that one, please.
So the main women who come across to me at the moment is working on the project design concept for all our future robots. So at the moment, if you look on the YouTube, you'll see the present robots that we operate on. We're going up to a version 6 on that at the moment. Very much into the design and concept part of that. They're also running a lot of the new development teams and the CI project teams as well. We have 5 different streams inside our company, which ranges, they all sort of steadily overlap with each other as well. So we have the installation and commissioning, the design for all new infrastructures and sites around the world. We then have about 3 different project design streams who are looking at all the future developments inside that. Opportunities available in every single one of them at the moment.
Brilliant. We put the links in the chat box as well to remind people. And Lindsay, is there anything from your perspective that you're trying to solve with people and women from the armed forces community at the moment?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, fundamental to how we kind of deliver our service to our customers is around solving their problems and kind of getting and bringing different perspectives to kind of the problems that they face to create kind of unique and bespoke solutions. And diversity of thought is really critical to that in terms of how we create that diverse and rich picture of support. Now, we recognise that the neurodiversity opportunities rely within there are really critical, and within that neurodiversity, in terms of the kind of the veterans experience more generically, but also the female lived experience is often very different. So that brings a unique level of perspective to a lot of these challenges. And within that lived experience, that's not solely just within the generic kind of female veteran barrier. What I would say is around the difference between the services and the experiences that bring really brings a level of richness to that experience. So whether it's Army, Air Force, Navy, and indeed not forgetting the military spouse community, because of the challenges and experiences that they have around that. We were really keen to try and show the level of support and opportunity that we provide within the organisation to pull some of that really kind of unique talent into the business.
Thank you, Lindsay. And Jen, are there any particular business drivers from your side of why business is pulling talent from the armed forces community into the business?
Yeah, absolutely. So for those that are less familiar with KPMG, we're what you would call a professional services firm, which essentially means we have a really broad range of services we offer. And you might know us for audit, or you might know us for consulting, but equally there's tax, legal, there's a wide range of services we provide. So we're a really diverse organization, but diversity in and of itself, inclusion, diversity and equality, equity, it's a strategic priority for the firm. And we really need diverse people, echoing what's just been said. We really need diverse people so that we have that diversity of thought. We're problem solvers. We work with clients to find solutions across a really broad range of topics. You're often engaging with quite senior stakeholders in those organizations, and a lot of those softer skills, those emotional intelligence skills, those building strong relationships. There are just a lot of skills also on the practical organizational front, the getting things done front. There are a lot of really transferable skills that all people really from the armed forces community, but especially women in the armed forces community bring that we really do benefit from. And our firm goals are to have a 40-40-20 split on diversity, as we recognise non-binary genders as well, so we offer flexibility there. But we are striving to meet those goals, and we have pretty much from the top down, we have over 50% representation on our board. We really want to make sure we have that all the way through our pipeline, all the way up to our most senior positions, so that we have that diverse talent that really do bring that resilience, that organisation, those soft skills, that emotional intelligence, and that real problem-solving curiosity to support our clients.
I'm glad you brought out some of those skills at the end there too, that we should focus on. And Millie, from a financial services perspective, are there particular problems that you're seeing or challenges that you're seeing the armed forces solve at the moment?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think Citi's actually undertaking a transformation program, which is our response really to some of the more serious regulatory matters we're trying to solve. And I think if you look at what's at the heart of that response, it's all about ownership, accountability, and unity of purpose, which are things that we see the military being well versed in and well understand. They sort of instinctively understand this idea of mission and purpose, and going after the collective for playing your part in a greater good. I'd also say, as it pertains to women, obviously Citi is the first Wall Street bank to put a woman in the CEO position, and I think what it shows really is that we're serious about advancing and supporting women in all positions. And we've done that right at the top of the house. So not only with Jane Fraser, but also with her CEO Karen Peets coming in as well to lead that transformation. And sort of like going back to what Lindsay was saying, it's really around that complexity of problem solving, and what we see in military personnel is sharp thinkers, natural leaders that have been well schooled in those skill sets, and problem solvers. We've got a lot of complex problems to solve.
Complex problems. And I'm glad you mentioned role models as well, because we're not going to be shy of those today. There's plenty of those throughout the day. So thank you so much. And then finally, Rob, what are you seeing the kind of problems and challenges at your end at the moment?
Yeah, thanks, Johnny. Reiterating what most of the rest of the panel said, really, I mean, the engineering world as a whole is generally an 80-20 split between the genders, and about a year and a half ago, Jacobs also rolled out 40-40-20. So how do you go about changing that in a part of industry which is traditionally incredibly male orientated? So we started that by utilizing our graduate programs, and ground up now is a 50-50 gender split, which in itself is quite a quick turnaround, but it's taken time to change the thinking and to look into different areas, different disciplines in the market space to do so. How do we then support certainly female side of life coming into the business and future careers, and indeed the tricky question of maternity leave, etc. Jacobs has put in a bespoke project called Bridge the Gap. So if you were to say join the company and then need to go away on maternity leave, then that is completely covered, planned for, with a rollout, and then hopefully come back to work program, all put in with independent line managers, everybody bought in to that particular part of the business you're leaving and then returning to, or indeed a different part of the business that you might return to. It's a tricky one. We deliver such complex projects that, in quoting our senior vice president a couple of weeks ago, we don't know what skill sets we need, but we do know that we need leadership and we need agile thinkers. And that is where my job is particularly easy, because I can reach out into the armed forces community and bring those agile thinkers. Leadership comes with it. I've removed the leadership question, the standard leadership question that you have on any interview. What's the difference between leadership and management? That's gone out of our process now. That I don't need anybody from the military, whether you're a junior private through to brigadier, to start talking to me about leadership. We fully get that side of things. So I hope that sort of reiterates and shows the way that the whole of industry is moving to try and be as inclusive as possible. I think we've probably got a trickier side of it, because people see Jacobs engineering, not just out for engineers. I'm not an engineer. I'm a former Royal Marine. My skill set's being cold, wet and miserable. I have no idea how to fix anything. So just remember that if you're looking at different jobs, different aspects, it's not just the engineering side of life for Jacobs, which is important. It's that everybody that comes with that team, from a sales team to win the bid, all the way through to a team of people to make sure it's being delivered on time, to process through standard project management, etc.
That's great to hear about those actual changes happening as well in the business. Now we're going to turn to, so we've got some great brands that you represent today, great employers. We know you're on side and you want to get people, pull people in from the armed forces community. But are there any particular pieces of advice to get through and on board into the organization around your recruitment process? Is there any tips that you've got personally? Are there any courses or educational things that they can do to advantage their application? So if we could start with Jen, any tips and advice that you've got for the call today?
Yeah, sure. The main reason I wanted to sort of flag KPMG structure is we have a really, really broad range of jobs available. We work as a network, and we identify roles within the organization, and it isn't an internship. It isn't a big program where we sort of have 100 people who started on the same day. We do a one-to-one fit to roles. So we really need you to not only sort of engage with us on specific roles. It's not an I would like to join KPMG, it's I would like to be a program manager, or I would like to be a consultant, or I would like to train up to be an accountant. So it goes back to the point that Jules made, actually, and I was ticking off sort of most of my lists from her. Know what makes you tick and know what you want from the organization, because then you can have those really specific, detailed conversations. And that also ties into your point, Johnny, about training courses. It all depends what role you're going for as to whether there is a training course that would suit or not. So I wouldn't necessarily advocate doing a standard program management course or anything like that. I'd instead use your network, get connected, identify the role you want to do, and then be really targeted and specific towards that role. And that would give you the best chance of success. There's no point doing a PMO course if you want to be a consultant in a specialist field. The other point I'd make beyond sort of network, however much you like that word, is practice makes perfect. So it's not just then getting your CV so that it reads in a way that can be understood by somebody non-military and really shows the value, the benefits of everything you've done throughout your career, whether that is serving as a regular in the military or whether that is the roles you've had as a military spouse. Just articulating the value of what you've done, but also practicing for interview. And I'm sure most organizations use the same sort of competency style interviews. Where we see a lot of people fall down is using the STAR technique, using the situation or the task, the actions you took, but what was the result? What was the benefit? And practicing that really does make perfect. And then two more really quick points. So I called it patience, Jules called it know your worth, but I think hold your nerve for the right offer, the right role. I recall turning down the first offer I got and literally lying on my floor of my living room thinking, what am I doing? I've got no salary, I've left, why have I just turned this down? But I'm really happy where I ended up, so much so it's where I still am. So do, if you can, and if the circumstances allow, hold your nerve. And then finally, and again, specific to KPMG, timing is everything. We tend to look for candidates about 6 months out. So if you're 12 months out or further, by all means, get in touch, have conversations. But those targeted roles, those targeted conversations about 6 months out is probably the right time to really get in touch and engage with our process.
Wow, packed full of tips and advice there. And don't worry if you didn't note those down. We'll be releasing this recording after the event. Before we turn to John, if we can give a consideration to the over 50s as well, because I had a question come in about over 50s onboarding into organisations too. So John, what's any tips and advice for getting into Ocado?
Yeah, I just wonder if you mentioned the over 50s before you come to me, mate. The only thing I'll say is sell yourself properly. And what a lot of people have got the bad concept of when they come out of the army is, we did this, they did that, I helped to drive this, rather than selling themselves. You've got to put across what your main part was with inside that organization, how you did it, how you pushed it forward. Terminology, it's military terminology, try to get rid of it in all your interviews. As a section commander, I need to know that you were leading X team of X amount of engineers to go over whatever task you're trying to do and come up with the RCAs, come to the end of it. That's what I need from the person. Like Jennifer said, definitely use the STAR technique. It works every single time. It's really straightforward. But linking in with what Rob said as well. I'm running the engineering for a couple of sites at the moment. Do I really care that much about the engineering knowledge? No, not really. Because you don't know the aircraft missile system. Are you going to be linked into what I can do? No, but I can teach you that stuff. That's not a problem at all. What I can't teach you is that leadership and command part of it. And that's what I really, really need from every single person. And everybody who's applying for them, please do not think that your competition is that strong out there when it comes to leadership and management. I've interviewed at least 60 plus people this week for a head of an engineering position I've got running the site at the moment, and not a single one of those candidates can I move forward just because they haven't got that leadership and management capability. So please push that bit rather than your technical skills. I need to know your leadership skills. And as for over 50s, I'm well over 50. When you come up to middle management and higher management, there's absolutely loads of positions out there. Or if you want to fall back and have a nice easy time and drop down to a low-level engineering or running a shift of 4 people, there's opportunities there for you as well. So please don't think that you're over the hill when you're my age. Hopefully I'm not.
Easy paper round, that's all I can say. Looking really good on it. But thank you for addressing that, because we do have had an over 50s event before as well, because so much wealth and experience there too. And Rob, any tips and advice for yourself for onboarding into Jacobs?
Yeah, absolutely. So without signposting myself forevermore, it is to get in contact with me. I run Jacobs' Project Soft Landing, so I'm here to hold your hand through the whole process, completely one-on-one process. So that goes from everything from just having a general chat about what you want to do, and I can help you look at the different roles that are out there that you might not even know are suitable to your skill set. Turn around the CV with you, or indeed one of my colleagues will help turn that around so it looks like what we need it to look like. And then I'll do up to an hour's interview prep, 2 hours interview prep if really needed, so that when you go into that interview, there's absolutely no question at the end of it that the interviewers understand the full piece that you're bringing to the party. The interview process itself, always make sure that I've got one full military person on that interview panel, so that if you can't translate the old Jack speak, whatever your background is from the military, you can say it and the individual at the other side will understand it, translate it into what needs to be said on that scoring sheet for you to be able to get through the process best way. So just to caveat and to add some further knowledge to that, Project Soft Landing is a completely open book process. You can use it for all the prep and preparation that you need, and then skip on to somebody else who's maybe on the call today. That's absolutely fine. That's within the social value gift that Jacobs wants to give back to the service community. If it is something that you want to utilize, please feel free to reach out, find me through the OA or on LinkedIn, and we can book all those conversations in. Furthermore, at the face-to-face event, which is in a couple of weeks' time from the OA, I'll be sending 4 of my recent new starters and a couple who have been at the business a bit longer, who have left the military, whether that's US military or UK military, to have a chat with all of you, hopefully at the face-to-face event, to really talk you through how the process goes and how it works better. And then within there, you've got yourself 4 people to network with in the Jacobs side of life, and indeed everybody's connected at some point. So I hope that's of use.
And thanks for letting everyone know again about the follow-up in May, and details at the end of this event. Millie, any sort of tips and advice from your end?
Yeah, sure. And thanks, Johnny. I think a lot of the things that I would have put forward was already said by Jen. So I would say that, we have a veterans network at City that's definitely worth connecting with, because there's 2 or 3 tracks into joining City as a veteran. One is on our formal program that we've got that sort of gives people a full-time role in our front office, and that does have some certificates that you can undertake in advance that would at least serve to give you confidence in the subject matter when you went to interview. It's not mandatory, but in particular, the one that we see people studying for is the investment management certificate. And again, it's entry level, kind of covering the basics of the products, and actually just serves to give people a bit of confidence, but by no means do we expect it. In terms of like formal qualifications that would be needed to do the job, then that's something that we would work with people once they're here. There's also the lateral hiring that could be done, coming straight into a role at City. And then to some of the points others have made, the kind of things we see people doing is project management, program management. But again, we don't expect the formal qualification. It might serve to give people confidence. But to Jen's points on that lateral hiring, it's about that networking. And, what we see is that could be multiple conversations. But my advice would be not to get disheartened, because you're sort of building up a profile with us. And, bankers can be quite risk adverse in terms of like, oh, what do we think of this person? And, it's when that group comes together and all 4 or 5 people are saying, well, actually, I found this, and then, that sort of inertia, as it was, would take us to a decision. But don't get disheartened, because every conversation you have is taking you closer to something that would ultimately could work out well for you. And then the other thing I would say is there's an insight event at City in September time, where you can get an overview of different areas of the firm, meet veterans that are working here, see and hear the sort of, if I can see it, I can be it stories of people that have been successful here. Even we've got some really senior individuals who've done really well and been promoted all the way to managing director in recent years. So there's some really good stories, people that are doing really interesting and varied work. And as I mentioned before, we are looking to expand our return to work program to include like a parallel track for veterans as well. And that will be with supported learning qualifications that run alongside, and dedicated like buddy and mentorship alongside that. So my advice really is just to get in touch, find out more, and keep having conversations.
And see it and be it. I love that. I'm nicking that. Lindsay.
I mean, absolutely some great kind of tips and advice from the previous panel member. So I shall try my best not to duplicate too much. But going back to kind of Jen's point about networking is key. At Atkins, our corporate culture is very inclusive and supportive. So, reach out to people that you might know, with, utilize LinkedIn. I know without fear kind of being the focal point as well. Feel free to link in, connect with me, and I can connect people with the right people. But it's around finding people with commonality that you can try and start having some of those conversations with, and demystify some of the initial challenges about leaving the military. I mean, one of the things that I found from a personal perspective really challenging was looking at the corporate job specs, firstly understanding what they mean, but also feeling as if we have to be able to tick all the boxes to be able to apply for those roles, which 90% of the time is not necessarily necessary, and it's a very female trait to kind of feel you have to satisfy that. So use your networks, develop networks, reach out and ask those questions, and just demystify some of those very critical points around those those job specs. But also, particularly from an Atkins perspective, we have such a range of diversity of opportunities, both within defence but also within our non-defence businesses. If you see the role that doesn't quite kind of tick what you're wanting to do, use that as a leverage point to explore and expand within different areas of the company. One of the things that we're really keen on is looking at that mobility within the business, and utilising kind of talent, and identifying it and progressing it within the different areas that might identify niche or support. So don't be afraid to take a chance on something that you don't think looks entirely right. It's such a different kind of a change that be brave, but be kind of sure of yourself in terms of part of that process. One of the questions that I saw in the chat box around reservists, so certainly from an Atkins perspective, we offer additional leave as part of our kind of package for reservists so that they can meet their training commitments throughout the year, and that's paid leave in addition to your standard package. So one of the reasons we very much do that is we recognise the kind of additionally the opportunity and kind of experience that being a reservist brings. So we're really keen to support that as part of our structure. But network, my main thing.
Your network is your net worth. And thank you for supporting reservists. As a serving reservist myself, thank you so much. So 5 fantastic speakers, 5 fantastic organizations. We'll follow up after this with information about how you can get in touch. There's stuff in the chat box too. But that concludes the first half of this day. So we're now going to move on to our first of 6 deep dive panels. So a chance to ask some more questions too. And the first of that is going to be careers in the city. I'm now going to hand over to my OA colleague, career consultant, Lisa Jones, who's not only a veteran herself, but has also had a career in the city. Perfect match for this panel. Lisa, thank you for joining us. I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Johnny. The word role model has been used already a few times today, and for good reason, but it really does give me genuine pleasure to have on this panel some fantastic role models currently working in the city. As you can see from the slide, we've got Hannah, Kelly, Emma and Jen, who you've already met earlier today. And I'm going to ask them now to tell you a little bit about themselves before we dive into the questions. So Hannah, perhaps if we begin with you and then we'll move on to the others. Can you tell us a little about yourself, your role, and why you're here today supporting the event?
Hi, yes. Yeah, thank you very much for having me today. So yeah, my name is Hannah Zales. In terms of why I'm supporting today, I've come from a military background myself, and I've been serving in the army now as a reserve for just over 4 years. My role at the moment is as a CMT attached to the Fusiliers based in the city, and I'm also an army spouse. So, you know, I can relate to working in the city, both in my army capacity, but also as someone who's balancing time around a partner in the army. So my career so far has been focused in the financial crime and legal compliance sector. So I'm currently working as a senior analyst at Herbert Smith Freehills, which is an international law firm based in the city.
Super, thank you, Hannah. Great to have you on board. Kelly, if you could introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Kelly Mullane. I'm a Senior Vice President and a Senior Business Consultant at Northern Trust. That effectively means I work for the sales team. I've been in the city now near on 15 years, working in various institutions, including Barclays Capital as was and Goldman Sachs. I've been with Northern now just over 8 years. I am a veteran. I served in the British Army for 8 years, including a couple of tours in Iraq and all over the place. And I'm supporting today because I always felt that I was very lucky to get the role and the introduction to the city. I remember telling the other panelists about the time where I put my CV on a website and I got called up by a veteran himself who said, "Hey Kelly, would you be interested in a job in the city?" And my response was, "Which city?" So I truly didn't know anything about the financial world until I joined it. And I was very lucky. I've been given a great career, and I always felt that I wanted to be that wedge in the door for others who might want to follow in my footsteps.
Fantastic, thank you. So if Emma, if you could introduce yourself, that would be great.
Of course, thank you, Lisa. So Emma Spilsbury, I'm a Vice President at Goldman Sachs. So I commissioned into the Adjutant General's Corps in 2007, where I spent an initial few years with 3rd Battalion, the Rifles, with deployments to Kosovo and Afghanistan, before becoming a platoon commander at Army Training Regiment Winchester, and then finally the Regimental Administration Officer at 1st Regiment Royal Horse Artillery, before deciding to leave the Army in 2014 after 8 years. So on leaving, I had a brief spell with JP Morgan at around 18 months, sort of working as a business manager before realizing I was sort of moving a little bit too far away from the human resources work that I really wanted to specialize in. So moved across to Goldman Sachs in 2016. I sit within the employee relations team, which is a relatively distinct HR stream. So we're generally dealing with the more complex and sort of challenging areas of people management that just occur within an organization of several thousand people. And so I cover all of our European offices. And ultimately, we're a team that helps the firm navigate its sort of legal, reputational, regulatory landscape around people issues.
Thank you. And finally, Jen, if you could introduce yourself for those who perhaps weren't on the event earlier today.
Sure, thanks, Lisa. Hi, everyone. Jen Page. I'm a director at KPMG. I served in the Army for 12 years in the Intelligence Corps, and then I joined KPMG on leaving through our military leavers program. So I've walked the walk of sort of transitioning through the military leavers program. Number of reasons I'm here twice today. First and foremost, I got so much help and advice when I was leaving that was invaluable, and I'm a really big fan of pay it forward. So I want to really actively help others, but also more so since I've left the Army. Actually, I've been really quite heavily involved in a number of ID initiatives. So I'm the senior lead for inclusion, diversity, equity in my particular team, which is a financial crime technology team. So I'll be connecting to Hannah after this to chat all things financial crime. But I established a women's network within my team. But now, most lately, I've also got really interested and I'm really involved in social mobility. And I'm on our social mobility network at KPMG as well. So very driven, one, for a Women into Employment event, but also I know we're targeting the whole forces community. And I found, I mean, when I'm in my mod glib days, I call the Army my finishing school, and it definitely added a bit of polish to me and broadened my horizons about what the outside world was like. And so I'm also keen to do that. But finally, and the only sort of salesy bit, KPMG have also really strongly encouraged me to be here. So there's definitely a team from the top as well, and the firm itself is really supportive of veterans, reservists, the spouses community, you know, pretty much the whole audience here. So we definitely want to support as best we can.
That's great to know. Thanks, Jen. And I was loving the bit of networking there. Fantastic that you guys are going to connect. So this question, first question I'm going to ask, and I'm going to ask the same question to all of you, but Kelly has actually touched on it already when she told the story about, you know, which city. So the city traditionally represents an area of London, but what does it mean today, and what does it mean to you individually? What are its boundaries, perhaps, and how does it define itself? So perhaps Jen, if you'd kick us off there, that would be great.
So I think it was a bit like Kelly, actually, and especially because I'm based out of Canary Wharf, so I don't even feel like I'm based in the city, you know, the square mile. The particular part of KPMG I work in is financial services. So to me, there was going to be a strong connection to London, but I'm from London anyway, so I probably didn't overthink it. But I knew that's where I wanted to be for the breadth of opportunity of careers. I didn't necessarily define it as a geographical area. I think I personally in my head defined it more as this is where lots of people that do the same type of work exist and coexist, and it's sort of the epicenter, and I want to be in and amongst it. I didn't think about what happened to wear sharp suits. I didn't think about anything like that. I was more desperate to reinvent myself. Actually, I'd gone, when I'm talking to service leaders, I think, are you going to reinforce or reinvent yourself? Are you going to reinforce what you do or go a different route? And I was going a different route. So I think I was more caught up in that than getting hung up on whether I was working in the city or not. And I think fortunately, because of the network I had, the connections I'd made, and actually I got my job at KPMG, my initial contact through Facebook, because I'd written, can anybody help review my CV? Somebody looked at my CV and sent it straight to the chair of the network. So again, similar stories. I hadn't overthought it, but to cut to the chase, I think it's changed even more now. So for me, it was already quite amorphous. Now, post-pandemic, hybrid working, virtual working, it's even less geographically defined, I think, and it is more a mindset about the type of work you do, the types of institutions you perhaps want to consider. Some of them can be viewed as more traditional, but again, I think post-pandemic, some of that, you will be in a suit and cufflinks and everything. It's all changing. So I think you can make it what you want it to be. And perhaps my biggest tip would be, don't have any preconceived notions about what the city is. You can make it what you want it to be.
Brilliant advice. Thanks, Jen. What about you, Hannah? What's your take on the city?
I mean, for me, I think the city and what it represents has changed a lot. And especially, as Jen said, after COVID, that's really changed. And specifically as a reservist being based in London, I've found city firms, and more particularly legal firms, to be really accessible and supportive within my role in the army, but also as an army spouse. And I think the perceptions that I've had from people in the army is that you might need to live in the city to work here, and that's no longer the case. And again, especially in the legal sector, there are those perceptions that you have to be working longer and flexible hours and living right next to the office. And I think those barriers aren't there anymore. And law firms are a lot more flexible now in terms of working remotely. So I'm also based in Canary Wharf, but I live an hour and a half away. So, I'm not in the office that much. And so there are a lot of changing working patterns now to suit your commitments. So for me, it's been really helpful being in the reserves. I have to attend reserve events in the evenings. I was deployed to help with the COVID efforts, and perhaps people would perceive the city not to be accessible to that, but it is now. And I think firms are recognizing that being in the reserves, they recognize those skills that you're bringing. And so they are happy to let you have those times off. And maybe that wasn't the case, but, it really is now. And there are a lot of traditional routes into law firms that aren't there anymore. And now there's a lot of untraditional routes that you can go into. So for me, I'm in compliance and financial crime, and they're really looking at veterans and reservists to bring those skills, to the firm. So I think it's definitely changed a lot, in the last 5 years. I can agree with that.
That's good to hear. I mean, a lot of people talk about the silver linings of the pandemic, but it's good to hear that on the ground that this is actually the case. So thank you. Emma, perhaps you could let us know your thoughts.
Yeah, of course. If you had asked me to define the city 8 years ago as I was leaving the army, I definitely would have thought about Canary Wharf, kind of the square mile, pinstripe suits, business lunches, a good degree of nepotism. But I have found the reality to be very different from that, and it continues to evolve. So I remember turning up at my first role at JP Morgan in a sort of grey suit and shirt, and actually very quickly figuring out, is this not how we need to be? I could evolve to have my own style, and to this point of slightly reinventing yourself. And indeed, if I obviously work in a particularly corporate organisation, but our dress code has evolved so that we're now see jeans around the office. It's created a much more informal, kind of relaxed atmosphere. I think the offices, whilst quite imposing, are typically set up for collaboration. There's coffee, there's shared spaces. And I've seen over the last 8 years, the city evolve to be more accommodating, I think, of its employees' needs. So again, Goldman's, for example, has some of the most generous parenting leaves available, and we think that that's going to be a barrier for some reason, but it's not. We have extremely generous benefits. And again, I think to this point around the geographical shift through the pandemic, we're now really seeing various organizations recognize that there is, hybrid working opens up a talent pool that isn't geographically tied to London hubs. And again, all of these firms, whilst they have their brands and images, they have a whole host of career paths that within them. So again, at Goldman's, we have roles in compliance, risk, vendor management, operations, technology, audit, human resources. So again, to look beyond the sort of first line of business, which is something that I perhaps wasn't thinking past that when I was initially looking. And honestly, I'd say, remember, the city is just made up of people like you and I trying to balance their personal, professional, and family lives, but often without the significant extra string to their bow that you all bring in terms of adaptability, resilience, transferable skills from your military experience and connections.
Thanks so much, Emma. And I increasingly actually have seen jobs being advertised as being London/hybrid. So that's quite good to see. Kelly, let's hear from you.
Well, I think I would agree.
Earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with what everyone says. I took a bit of a slightly different role of thought about this question. And I guess my biggest piece of advice is the city isn't just made up of financial institutions. We're not just investment banks. You know, you have compliance, you have consultants, you have auditors, lawyers, you know, you have all the service industry that goes around these investment banks, the banking world, the financial institutions as well. So when you're thinking of the city, it's not just the trading floors and, you know, the old boy network shouting at each other over the trading floor. It is this huge industry that is supported by all different types of organizations, leadership training, you know, mental health training, HR, consultants. You know, it's a huge, great big industry that is supported by lots of different companies and skills and talent pools, which I think we don't really even think about when we think about the city. And that's certainly something that I've realized over the last 8 years, is it's not just the finance world, it's everything else that goes with it. And interestingly, a lot of these big firms are not just based in London, they have offshoot branches all over the country. So Edinburgh, for example, Bournemouth, JPM are big in Bournemouth. You know, you've got other hubs around the country that are not just in London, not just in that square mile. And I work in Canary Wharf myself, and I've worked in the city. So, you know, I love it. It's great. You can feel the buzz. You know, that's something that I didn't think was there when you walk around and everyone's kind of doing the same thing, working hard, but also playing hard too. And that does exist still in the city. It does have this kind of group network, fantastic network of people, you know, just all aiming for the same thing. And I think it's fantastic. It's a great place to work and progress your career. We'll talk more about career progression, I'm sure, later on. But yeah, my take on the city was something that I hadn't even considered. And now it's something that I don't think I can see myself leaving.
Brilliant, thank you, Kelly. And it's great to hear you speaking so positively and passionately, so thank you. So I'm now going to pose you some individual questions, and we'll start with Hannah. You're a reservist, as you've mentioned, also a military spouse, but also you're a professional working in the city. How do you respond to these labels? How do you adapt to the different communities to which you belong?
So, I mean, in my experience of the city and the legal career that I've had so far, I found that through all these labels, I haven't felt disadvantaged by the commitments, whether that be, you know, in my reserve career or being an army spouse. So I said before, I work for Herbert Smith Freehills, they're an international law firm. They signed the Armed Forces Covenant in 2016. And so like many other firms in the city, they've been, you know, committed to ensuring they have that flexibility within all the roles they offer, whether that be as a lawyer or in business services. They were given the Gold Award last year in recognition for that. So they've been, you know, actively recruiting and supporting serving members and their families, you know, and reservists. And so, as I said earlier, you know, I never felt confined to the traditional lawyer route of becoming a lawyer. There are other roles. So we have veterans in the firm at the moment who are chief information officers, cybersecurity managers, a lot of veterans in project management and business development roles. And so for me, when I applied at the firm, I, you know, was encouraged because I knew about their armed forces policy, and I knew that they had people there working within that, and that they recognized the skills that, you know, we could bring. So since I've been with the firm, I've worked in 3 different positions in 2 teams within financial crime and been promoted. And yet at the same time, I've still managed to serve, so just over kind of 28 days a year commitments to the reserves and extra deployments. And I've still managed, you know, to succeed with that city career. So I think for me, within all those labels, I don't think it confines you. And I think, yeah, it's not a barrier to working in the city anymore.
That's great news, and fantastic to hear that HSF is so supportive to you. Kelly, you had a career in the army and you're now heavily involved in veterans networks in the city. How do you see women position themselves in the city, and are there, in your opinion, limiting factors, whether they're self-imposed or perhaps imposed by employers, or even cultural perceptions and stereotypes? Perhaps you can also mention something about, you know, juggling family life as well.
Absolutely. So let me start by saying I don't believe there's any limit to what women can achieve here. You know, it's what, nearly 105 years since we got the vote. And frankly, I don't think there's anything that can hold us back at the moment. We're given every opportunity to achieve what we want out of life. And that includes in the city. You know, we're not just expected to be wives and mothers anymore. We have access to education at every level. We're active in all industries, not just finance, as well as being wives and mothers. You know, we're bosses. We have the right to say no or yes, or maybe if you put the bins out. But I think positioning in the city, the big thing for me, and in my experience, the only real limitations are the ones we give ourselves. You know, a classic example of this is being when we don't tend to put ourselves forward for jobs, because it seems that we can't do almost everything that's required on that job description. Whereas men don't think that way at all. And I think they back themselves way more. And as a brand, you often have women who identify as many things. They'll say, I'm a mother and I work, or I care for my parents, or whatever the case may be. I never really thought I personally ever had a problem with blowing my own trumpet, but I do label myself, and quite proudly, in fact, as a working mother of two, almost first and foremost. But you hardly ever hear a man saying I'm a working father. The city is doing better at hiring and retaining women, but it's not yet there yet. I think we've got, what, 5 or 6 female CEOs in big financial firms. And I do think there are structural barriers which have historically hindered female progression within the workplace, you know, thinking of the meetings whilst playing golf or in the pub, you know, cronyism and the old boys club. And women leaving to have kids is the big one. But there's also the cultural perception that you have to be one of the boys to progress in the city. And we all know and experience that in our former careers. But the city isn't all barrel boys and posh, sleazy posh boys in suits, as I've mentioned earlier. And nor is it the women as personal assistants tottering around with stilettos making the brews anymore. Times have changed massively. And the language of the city is changing. And employers are recognizing that they're losing brilliant talent by not providing the opportunity for women to progress and get promoted. And I think COVID has helped us. There's a new contract now between the employer and the employee. People are not afraid to ask for flexible working arrangement. And there is a general focus or commitment or even scrutiny, I think, on diversity, which is providing an opportunity for women to thrive across all industries. You know, and no industry wants to be seen as absent from this whole discussion, right? Interestingly, a white middle-aged man said to me recently, well, I won't get promoted because I'm not diverse or a woman. And I replied to him, well, welcome to my world for the last 50 years. I think career limitation is still evident, notably returning from maternity leave, as I mentioned, and balancing the whole family and caregiving responsibilities and a career. But this is a societal issue. This isn't just in the city. And I do believe that there is still a silent divide in the city between women who have children or caring responsibilities and those who don't. The divide is getting smaller, certainly, and COVID is absolutely helping that. But it is still there at times. But what can we do about it? And I think we've all touched on it, the normalization of flexible working, you know, the promotion of more women, in particular those who do the daily juggle struggle, as I call it. As more and more women pave the way and succeed in this historically male-dominated environment, I think we're inspiring others to follow suit and not just necessarily in suits. You know, I see it as my responsibility actually now to keep doing what I'm doing and, you know, almost proving that dying breed of the old boys club wrong.
Brilliant, thank you so much. And I love that juggle struggle, it's brilliant. Emma, working for a global organisation, are there any key differences that you've noticed in how other countries or regions are responding to the offer that women from the armed forces bring to the business? And what routes are there to break into organisations. Millie at City mentioned earlier about lateral hiring. We hear a lot about the internship programs, but are there many opportunities outside of those?
Cool. So I guess I'm obviously answering this through the lens of Goldman Sachs, but what I would say is many of my responses are going to apply to most City firms. So yeah, as a global firm, we certainly recognise the benefits of having veterans, reservists, and those with military connections as part of sort of the fabric of our firm and how they enrich generally our culture. We have employees who have served in various militaries all around the world, operating in every division at the firm. And we have veterans operating from analyst all the way up to partner, which is our most senior level at the firm. So we think about some of the routes available to break into the organisation. Yeah, we run a veterans internship programme, which is probably the most typical pathway into the firm. And we've just celebrated our 10th year of running that programme in Europe and our 13th year globally. The veterans on our programmes are from different services, different regiments and cap badges, different genders, different social mobility and educational backgrounds, and we recognise all of those transferable skills. I would say that attracting women has always been rather challenging, but clearly part of that is the demographic of the military and its own gender representation. But more broadly, I think perhaps women don't consider Goldman Sachs or investment banking more broadly until they're approached by another woman at the firm. So to this point around sponsorship and advocacy, it's really important as a sort of female community to keep championing each other. People will often say they have no idea what investment banking is, but guess what? Neither did I, and I imagine very few people did at the point that they applied or were hired. It absolutely isn't a barrier to entry. We aren't looking to you or anyone sort of with military connections for your deep financial knowledge. We're looking for everything else that you bring, and we'll provide training, support, guidance around the rest. Another route in, as you sort of touched on, is as a direct experienced sort of lateral hire, which is how I joined the firm. And that is essentially looking for ways to map your current experience across to open job roles. So this is less common certainly at Goldman Sachs, but I think some of that hinges around that misconception and that we've sort of touched on, that we need to satisfy all the job criteria, or we need to have knowledge of financial institutions or some form of financial qualification. Now, as we've sort of touched on, men will often have much more confidence in this regard. I meet 50% of the criteria, that's good enough. One of the other things I would sort of bring out on that point is, as an employer, we want people who can grow. So we're rarely looking for the finished article. If you're able to complete every aspect of a job description up front, you're probably going to get bored quite quickly and move on. So we recognise you're not going to hit every single criteria, and that's okay. We need you to grow and sort of develop and evolve in the role. So it's that confidence to talk about your strengths and what you do bring. Don't worry about the aspects that you don't meet. Talk about the strengths and the things that you do bring. Just a couple of other points I think I'd highlight about certainly Goldman's, as with many other City employers. We're obviously a member of the Armed Forces Covenant, and as Hannah said, we have a range of leave options to support our reservists who need to attend training and mobilisation. We have a veterans network and a really strong community where we run sort of social events and a monthly brew series where we sort of build connections internally with fellow veterans and allies. And then we're very involved in our charity workspace. So we, as an example, have partnered with an organisation called Heropreneurs, where we've hosted Dragon Den style events where ex-military entrepreneurs host Goldman Sachs panelists, and we sort of help mentor them and offer advice on their business strategy. And recently we sent a team of Goldman Sachs veterans to take part in a fundraising event supporting a vulnerable and homeless veterans charity sleeping out overnight at the Tower of London. So a really kind of broad range of routes available in and support that we provide once you are in.
Fantastic, thank you, Emma. I particularly liked what you said about advocacy and supporting each other, and I think that's hopefully what this day is all about. Finally, my last question to Jen. The big four consultancies, as they're known, have long been a pull for the military, as well as a well-trodden path. Do you still find this to be the case, or are you beginning to see this assumption challenged? And how is the talent diversifying?
Yeah, there's a lot to that question. But I'll start with a small story. The first conversation I had when I knew I was leaving was with a good friend in the Air Force, and she worked at Deloitte, and half an hour coffee, just my very first, what does the outside world look like? And at the end of that coffee, I said, thank you so much. It's clear consulting's not for me. And 7 years later, clearly I was very wrong about that. So I think being open to exactly the points Kelly was making, Emma was making, Hannah was making, the big four have this sort of reputation that I didn't necessarily take into account, but they're really worth getting to know for the variety and the diversity within them behind the label. I didn't realize for the first few months I was in a professional services firm, which literally means we have a lot of services we offer to lots of people, but I didn't know that's what it was. So you can do audit, you can do consulting, you can do tax work, we have a legal division. There are so many different things you can do as part of the big four, and I think that's the lure you speak to in your question. It's sort of, yes, there is a brand to it. And again, another small bit, just an incredible friend of mine who's an ex-gunner hasn't worked at the big four, and she is incredibly successful, and she's just off now starting her own startup. But some jobs were not open to her because it said big four experience required. And so I do think it's worth understanding some of those nuances, but actually I have found that, the draw for me personally is I knew I wanted to reinvent myself. So I knew I was going to be learning. I knew I was going to be growing. And so one, I wanted to be in quite a large institution. So there was a bit of a safety net and I wasn't going to be too exposed on day one. Two, I knew I wanted to work in financial crime from the get-go. I'd used my enhanced learning credits to upskill myself. That's what I wanted to do. So I was looking for organizations that had those departments. And I wanted them to be big enough. There was a training budget, really quite selflessly. I knew exactly what I wanted. And three, I wanted to be surrounded by brilliant people I could learn from. And that's why I landed where it was. It wasn't the fact it was a big four. It wasn't any of the branding. What really sealed the deal is that every person I spoke to at every step of that process was just wonderful, and I could align to their values. I knew it was a firm that had a really strong people agenda. I knew it was somewhere I'd always stay interested in what I was doing, and that's why I'm still here. I'm actually on my third team, all within the financial crime discipline, but I started out in corporate intelligence. I moved to investigations and compliance, and now I work in technology. So I've been able to grow and develop. I do think it's a well-trodden path, and it does continue to be so. We do have a lot of interest from the armed forces community, and we're here to encourage that to continue. We'd absolutely like to see more women. We did a concerted push a few years back and managed to double our numbers. If anything, women on this call, it's a battle to try and get you in because you're in demand. And as you are such a small percentage of the armed forces community, we really do want you on board. We want that diversity. We want that, all of the skills you bring. So sure, the biggest hitch really has been one around work-life balance. And there's a perception that once you're in the big four, you're working every hour there is. Sometimes you are, sometimes you're not. Fortunately, this week's been a bit of a quieter week. If you'd spoken to me a couple of months back, I'd have been tearing my hair out. I think a lot of jobs like that. But again, we are, a gold award holder. We do recognise commitments to the armed forces community. We do have the additional leave of flexibility for reservists. So I wouldn't equate a big four career to all work and nothing else. I think it is much more accessible nowadays. And once you're in, you really are supported in your career path and your career journey. And in fact, I'm fortunate, I've been promoted twice since I've been there to get to director. So there's there is a career there for you if you want it, and we'd love to hear from people and support them.
Fantastic, thank you, and thank you to all of you, Jen, Hannah, Emma, Kelly. It's been a brilliant session. It's been a real privilege for me to be here with you today, so thank you all, and hopefully some really great positive messages to everyone out there. Thank you. Obviously, the words leadership and management are often bandied around in the military community. But today we're joined by a diverse range of inspiring veterans from the US military, the RAF and the Royal Navy, Andy, Hannah, Sarah and Bianca. So what we're going to do is just get them to introduce themselves to us, tell us a little bit more about who they are, their background, and their current role. So let's start with Andy. Andy, welcome.
Thank you all so much for having me today. So I'm Andy. I'm currently a management consultant with Bain & Company. Have been here for about 1.5 years now. Prior to entering management consulting, I was a surface warfare officer in the US Navy for about 4.5 years. So did everything from engineering to security to deck evolutions. Was a lot of fun, really loved it. My husband was also in the US Navy, and we did a couple back-to-back deployments. So after that, decided to transition to the civilian sector and thought the MBA would make a great, bridge there. So went to London Business School, which was great for building out the skill set, and speaking on behalf of LBS here today.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Andy. And I often get asked by people about the value of an MBA, so perhaps we'll touch on that shortly. Let's now turn to Hannah. Please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello, everybody. I'm Hannah. I currently work for GE Aviation for Doughty Propellers, which is a subsidiary of GE Aviation. I am responsible for the profit and loss account for our US services business. So just to give you a little background about Doughty, we're split into 4 different streams of revenue: US services, rest of the world services, OE, which is our original equipment, ILS, which is integrated logistics, and then our hovercraft and maritime business. And just to give you a set of the scale, so my part of our P&L accounts for about 2/3 of our total business, and that's around $120 million a year. So it's quite a big responsibility for someone who's relatively new out of the military. So I left the RAF in 2016 as the chief engineer for search and rescue in my last role, and I came into GE on a leadership program, the military officers leadership program. And we did that for 2 years, which is a great program, and I'll talk about it a little bit more in one of my other questions. And then I've done 3 roles after rolling off programs. So I've been a sales director for our civil portfolio in Doughty. I've led our global customer services team, encompassing our American side of our business and our rest of the world side of our business. And now I'm obviously in the P&L role, which is a fairly new role for me. I've just been doing that 4 months, so I'm still really learning the ropes on that, and definitely annoying everybody every day, asking lots of questions. So that's me, and that's what I do.
Brilliant, thank you, Hannah. Hopefully we'll be able to see you at some point during this discussion. Sarah, if you could introduce yourself. It's lovely to have you on board today.
Lisa. So Sarah Thompson, I'm the Global Maritime Security Advisor for Chevron. So I work with our Global Security Department. People who don't know, Chevron is the 7th largest oil company in the world, and we're the 2nd biggest US oil company. I'm responsible for security risk management and assurance for our ports, terminals, ships, FPSOs and FSOs globally. I'm a retired Royal Navy warfare and intelligence officer, and I spent just shy of 18 years between intelligence and roles at sea.
What you haven't mentioned is that actually, which I think you mentioned to me on an earlier call, was that you're one of the only women in the world in aviation security, which really impressed me, and I don't know about our audience. But
Sorry, so well, I should say maritime security. So if we look at a kind of oil, gas, shipping and security, they're not generally areas that many women work in, which is unfortunate, because actually there are lots of opportunities in there. So hopefully we'll cover some more of that as we go through.
Fantastic. Thank you. And last but not least, finally, Bianca, it's brilliant to have you today. If you could just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you all. Yes, Bianca Gennaro Crow. I currently work at Citibank. I work in private banking, covering ultra high net worth clients. I've been here for 7 years. And prior to that, I was an officer in the Royal Air Force. And I primarily trained as an engineer, an aircraft engineer, same as Hannah. And actually, I've come across Hannah before in my career. I wasn't sure, I didn't know she was going to be on the call today. But then, actually, after doing that for basically one tour out of training, I then switched fire and diversified into cultural advisor work. I did a long language course at the Military School of Languages, Defence School of Languages, studying Pashto and Dari, and then I deployed to Afghanistan and then later to the Middle East with the Defence Cultural Specialist Unit. So yeah, I finished my work with the DCSU and then left there and joined Citi, actually on an ex-military program. So Citi, being a large American bank, do have very extensive military program, particularly in the US, but they have also rolled out in EMEA and here in London. They do offer it across a variety of businesses. So the program involved doing a number of rotations initially in different parts of the private bank business, and then I have lastly, I then moved into a permanent role into what I do now. So I am a commercial real estate specialist. So for high net worth clients, ultra high net worth clients, I underwrite and execute commercial real estate mortgages.
Fantastic, thank you all. And it's good to see that we can now see Hannah, so that's fantastic. I'm just going to ask a question to which all of you, if it's all right, could answer in turn. And that question is, why do women make good leaders and managers? And from your point of view, what are the key traits that they bring to the party? So Bianca, if we could just start with you then.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think when I kind of was considering this question, I think actually that, whether you're a male or female in terms of leadership, a really key aspect or a really key quality to have is emotional intelligence and the ability to find common ground and understand the people that you're working with and who are working for you. And I think that sometimes for women in particular, they can perhaps lack the self-confidence maybe, or the kind of belief that that is an important quality in leadership. And I think, personality traits aside, that is often a trait that women possess. And yeah, I think they really do bring that, and it's really, really important. I would say in my personal experience, that has always been helpful. So yeah, emotional intelligence for sure.
Super. Thank you, Bianca. Sarah, what are your thoughts on this?
I think a bit like Bianca, really, I kind of struggled when I first heard this question because I couldn't work out why I found it difficult to answer. And I think that for me, that the traits that make a woman a good leader and a manager is actually the same traits that make a man a good leader and a manager. And that's really important. My career in the Navy, I didn't follow that set career path. I actually went off piece, so to speak, and kind of did op tours in Bosnia and decided at a midpoint to go and be an intelligence officer. And when I got the job at Chevron, one of the feedback was that actually it was that adaptability and it was the variety of jobs that you had in your career. And I think that when you look at a job in a company like Chevron, where you have to influence people, it's that adaptability and leadership styles that make maybe ex-military people good at coming into industry, because you can exercise those several different types. And it's about being able to influence people. And I think the military, I think if you want to be a female officer in the military, you've got to be able to do that as well. So yeah, adaptability is probably one of the key ones.
Fantastic, thank you. Hannah, your perspective, please.
Yep. Okay, so exactly the same as Sarah and Bianca, I do not believe leadership is a gender-based skill. So I think regardless of whether you're a man or a woman, you can be exceptional leaders. And I guess that's good news for the men in the audience, because you can be great leaders alongside your female colleagues. I'd also like to say that I think there are hundreds of leadership qualities out there that are all really admirable. You go on LinkedIn or you Google leadership qualities, and there are literally hundreds. But I think that we're all human and nobody possibly could tick all of those boxes. So I think my number one leadership trait is being self-aware, understanding what you're good at and leaning into what you're good at, because we're not always going to be everything to everybody. And I also think part of that is being authentic with your team, showing them the real person behind the title, behind the job position, and being vulnerable with them. And I think my experience now, I am a leader of other leaders, and that is a privilege and a minefield, right? Especially in a civilian organization, because especially my first time leaders, they have not got any leadership training. They are literally thrown in the deep end. And, you know, all they have is, a lot of them are based in America. So all they have is this person on the end of the phone to try and coach them through some of these really tough situations that they're meeting for the first time. And that is a benefit that we all have from the military, is that we all have some formal leadership training, which is great. So you're not always going to get it right, but hopefully I think by being authentic and genuine and open about your own challenges, when you do get it wrong, you can get forgiveness from your team for a start, but you also build trust and you also give them space to learn. So if you show that you're not always getting it right and you're not this perfect person up above them, that gives them the space to experiment themselves, and if they get it wrong, to be able to learn from it. So my number 2 leadership trait is being a learner. So be curious, be a learner, and realize that you're on a leadership learning journey as well. However good you are, you can always get better. And then I think I've got loads, I've got 4, sorry, but you can't always be everything to everybody. So you know, you need to find strength in others. You're not, as we said, you can't tick every single box yourself. So if you build a team that's strong at things that you're not strong at, you can lean on each other, and you can basically make sure that you deploy the right person at the right time, because really being a leader is about having a team. If you don't have a team, then you can't be a leader. So your people, their individual needs and their needs as a team sit at the middle and the center of your leadership. So you need to be okay that you deploy the right person for the right situation, and sometimes that person isn't you, and that you need to be okay with that. And that, you know, it's okay to lean on other people. So summarizing: self-aware and authentic, confident enough to be vulnerable, and to know that you're also on a learning journey, and making sure that you build on the strengths of others, and you lean on the team, and you put the right person in the right role for the right time. And those traits are brilliant because everybody has them. You don't have to be particularly good at anything, so long as you're aware and you can use others. And I think that for me, that self-awareness, authenticity, and putting your people front and center, that's always served me really well.
Fantastic, thank you, Hannah. And I think, I really like what you said about the people being showing a willingness to learn, no matter how experienced or senior you are. Always learning is a brilliant thing to take away. Andy, over to you.
Yep, building on some of the previous answers, I also think, some of those soft skills are what's really critical to being a good leader. 2 that come to mind particular for me are empathy and humility. So I think building on what Hannah said earlier, I think it's incredibly important to be a learner, but also to empower your team to be learners. And I think a critical piece of that is having empathy and being able to discern between honest mistakes, and more egregious mistakes, and being able to respond appropriately to both of those situations. And again, just giving your team the space to grow in those areas. And I think humility is another huge one. And I think, also linked to what Hannah said earlier, I think humility is also, very strongly linked to confidence. But, both, within the military, management consulting and beyond, I think the more senior you become, the more of a leader you become, the less you're going to, be in tune with some of the details of the organization. So I think, it's essential to have the humility to be willing to ask some of those stupid questions, to understand what's going on, and also the humility to ask for help from your team, to complement you in areas where you may not be as strong. So for me, those would be sort of the two essential leadership traits, in addition to all the other great ones that were mentioned.
Fantastic, thank you, Andy. Also, Andy, following your career, as you mentioned, in the US Navy, you decided to do an MBA with London Business School. Can you perhaps tell us a bit about how you feel this education has enhanced your career, and has it kind of complemented your military leadership experience?
Yeah, for sure. So I think London Business School was incredibly helpful to my career, in a few main ways. The primary reason I decided to go to business school in the first place was transitioning out of the military. I really had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I remember calling my parents every week. One week I wanted to get a PhD, another week I wanted to be a psychologist. And my dad was like, look, Andy, I really think you should think about an MBA, because it really, opens you up to a variety of options. It's a springboard for careers in everything from social impact to business to the private sector. And business school provides a ton of opportunities to help you figure that out. So the first thing LBS gave me was just clarity into what it is I actually want to do. The first couple months and, throughout my time at LBS, they have companies coming on campus every day, explaining roles that are available, what they do. They also offer a variety of seminars on, careers in different fields like social impact, fintech, what skills are required, what does the day-to-day look like, and perhaps most importantly, career advising. So from going to all of those seminars, I became overwhelmed and had less of an idea of what I wanted to do. And I still remember the LBS career advisor sitting me down and saying, if you don't know what you want to do, consulting is a great choice, because, it's kind of the ultimate non-decision. You work in a range of industry and sectors, and again, can springboard into anything. And it's been a great choice for me. So, and LBS really gave me the clarity to get there. The second thing I would say it gave me is just a greater knowledge of how the civilian workforce operates. I think Imogen mentioned this earlier, but networking is absolutely crucial to getting a job in the civilian sector. Every job that I got an offer for, I was actually referred to by one of my LBS classmates. In leaving the military, I didn't really understand that. I thought, I'll apply to a job and it'll be merit-based and they'll look at my application. Relationships go a long way. I was hesitant to reach out. I was hesitant to ask people for their time. And LBS both gave me an incredible network of peers to build those relationships, and also the confidence to know how to reach out. And I would say the third thing is, just helping me get some of those hard skills. And more so than the hard skills, just the confidence, being able to walk into an interview and confidently talk about net profit versus gross profit was actually, absolutely critical. And also, the ability to translate my military experience into some of those harder skills. I think I struggled coming out of the military, translating things like being the safety officer for helicopter landings. What skills does that actually translate to in the civilian setting? And I'll share one story of experience I had at LBS that was, very impactful for me, and I think touches more directly on your question, Lisa, is how could I build off my military experience? I found coming into LBS, I had a lot more management experience than most of my peers, but again, a little bit lighter in the harder skill area. And I had a good friend and classmate who had worked in consulting, and she was having some, interpersonal questions about, leadership dynamics within the employer that she was working for. And she came to me for advice on that, and it was really exciting for me to feel like, I had something to give back to this community. But also a few weeks later, when I was applying for jobs, I was struggling so hard to translate my resume into something meaningful. And she sat down with me and was essentially a human translator. So I, said something like, oh, manage 210 maintenance repairs. And she was like, no, Andy, you mean you performed a scenario and feasibility analysis to identify which repairs to perform? And I was like, yes, that sounds like the right way to phrase it. So I know that was a long-winded response, but I'd say the three big things: clarity, confidence in my skill set, and also the ability to navigate civilian job market and network.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andy. And I think the network message is perhaps, the most important overarching thing. And the military network is just brilliant. So, people do use it. Hannah, As one of the first cohorts of GE's UK Aviation Military Officer Leadership Programme, with an RAF background in STEM, how did you succeed in breaking through roles and sectors perhaps traditionally seen as being dominated by men? Did you find that a challenge?
Thank you, Lisa. So I think when I was thinking about this question and after our brief last week, the question is posed as sort of tell your story. So I will give you a little bit about what makes Hannah tick and what kind of person I am. So just to tell you some of where my career decisions have come from. So I'm both dyslexic and dyspraxic, which makes life incredibly challenging when you get your numbers mixed up and your letters. And all the way through school, I was sort of told you're not very good at, you're not very good at this and you're not very good at that. And I am also incredibly stubborn. So for any of my colleagues, and I know a few have dialed on to this, if you want to get me to do something, tell me I can't do it. Tell me it's impossible, or no one's ever done it before, or I don't have the skill set, and I will go to extreme lengths to prove you wrong. Because that is just something that is in my DNA and my makeup. So having been told, oh, you're not very good at maths and you'll never just make that, I went out to prove, case in point, masters in mechanical engineering later, and a job with the Royal Air Force. So that kind of gives you a little snapshot of how I make decisions and why I found myself in some of the career paths I found myself in. I also have a mum who is an incredible lady in her own right, but who gifted me the advice from being knee-high to a grasshopper to do what I wanted to do, to carve my own path, and to, in her own words, don't be a sheep, Hannah. Don't follow the crowd. Do what you want. So while that makes me the person that I am, every single person on this call has their own journey, their own story, their own little twerks of creaks of their personality that means that they made the decisions that they made, and their own champions. And so what I thought I would share is maybe some of those learnings that I've had from my transition from military to commercial career. And what I see from my MOLPs, because I now lead the Military Officer Leadership Programme, I'm their boss. So, I've now coached 6 of them successfully through the programme, and I've got one just started and one about to start in May. So I set the scene for you. I'm, waving goodbye to RAF Valley and looking across the Menai Bridge through my rear view window, which is anyone who's left Anglesey will know that's, probably the highlight of your tour. No, not really. I love Anglesey. It's a lovely, lovely place. But, I'm waving goodbye to Squadron Leader Gray, and I'm waving hello to GE Aviation and to Miss Gray. And I kind of arrive and I get through the door, and I said this in my introduction, that I was incredibly lucky, the same as Bianca. I got myself onto a leadership program, and that was incredible, because when I left the military, I had no idea what I wanted to do. And some may say I still don't. But, it gave me the opportunity to do a bit of try before you buy. And I know there's a lot of companies that do that now. And especially, I think, as Bianca said, American companies are a little bit better towards their veterans than the UK. GE Aviation is obviously a massive American company, so we're just a little British enclave of it. And that's really great. But what I can genuinely say to you is that 90% of what makes me reasonably successful in the role that I'm in and in the roles that I've had are things that I was good at when I was in the military. And they are things that all military people are generally good at. So you're 90% there already if you want to break through into these careers. So the things that I picked out are, find people who know things and make friends with them, right? Influence is really important. Network is really important. Be curious, learn as much as you can. But every single time you've changed jobs or gone for a new tour, you've had to do that. So you just have to do it again. And it's just, you're in a different, you're just in a different environment. So don't forget that you are already good at that. What you bring from the military is process, discipline. You would not believe how undisciplined and lack of process there is in even really big corporations that have been around for a long time. So understanding how to get things done through other people, how to build a team, how to build a shared vision, That's not a common trait in my experience. You can add value almost immediately in that area because you've got that already. And say yes to things that other people don't. So I'll give you an example. I, Hannah, who has no experience with, very much at all, said yes to leading my business unit through Brexit. Right, what did I know about Brexit? You could probably write on the back of a postage stamp. What I knew about Brexit at the end of Brexit was a lot more, but I also didn't know very much about like a global organization with customers all over the world, with employees of multiple different nationalities, with suppliers from Europe, customers from Europe, airworthiness issues. But what am I good at? Bringing people together, organizing them and getting them to do stuff. So find the experts, bring them together, organize them. And yeah, I mean, Dad's got through Brexit like pretty successfully. So that doing stuff like that, it just builds your profile, and you're then seen as a person who can step into a challenge and who is a can-do person and who can embrace things that they don't know how to do or they don't really know much about, but they can just get stuck in and get things done. And all of that stuff, most of you will be nodding away thinking, I can do all of that. That's not that hard. And it's really, truly that the 10% that I've had to learn at GE was all the things like market and pricing and negotiations and stuff, but none of that's hard. You can learn that. So if I can do it, any of you guys can do it. But I think there are some things that are challenging, and I do want to kind of address those as well, because it's not easy. Am I going on too much?
It's all really fantastic stuff, Hannah, but I'm afraid we're going to have to
sorry,
interrupt there and give the floor to Sarah.
Apologies.
And perhaps we can, if we've got time later, we can continue. But Sarah, a kind of similar question to you, and you touched on it yourself in your introduction about how not many women are in the oil and gas sector, but equally, obviously, as we know, in the military and defence sectors. And how have you challenged this and succeeded despite this kind of barrier, if we can call it a barrier?
Yeah, so I think when you look at oil and gas, there's probably more women than you think. I think when we overlay, and I would say inside Chevron, we're actually we've got quite a diverse and inclusive kind of workforce. There's a large number of women. I think a bit like most companies where we're engineering focused, the leadership, getting people up to be chairman and the vice president is much more difficult because we needed to recruit women who were engineers 30 years ago to get them into that level. So as a company, I think that's something that we're working on. But the bit that this kind of question brought out for me really was company culture. So you feel able and supported to go and be a woman who and I'll be honest, 99% of the time when I go to external meetings, I'm the only woman in the room. But you feel supported to be able to do that because of the company culture that you work in. And I remember when I was leaving, someone said to me, remember that you're interviewing that company as much as they're interviewing you. And it sounded quite trite at the time because I quite frankly wanted to pay my mortgage. So I was a bit like, well, do I really, I really need a job. But one very quick story that hopefully it will help people. So I interviewed for another company before Chevron, and they shall remain nameless, but I walked into the interview room, two guys interviewing me. Immediately the atmosphere was just wrong. It was quite aggressive. It didn't feel very good. Within about 20 minutes, I'd had 4 questions, which in a roundabout way asked me about conflict in the workplace. And I thought, goodness me, you're only together for 8 hours a day. I've been on a tin box on an ocean for 9 months. We didn't have this much conflict in the workplace. And by the end of the day, we'd had a personnel interview as well. And one of the HR people came up to me and said, you've had a fascinating career. Think really carefully about the first job that you choose to take. And then a week later, I interviewed for Chevron. And I remember walking into the room and just feeling able to be me, to talk about my strengths, my weaknesses, and to feel like this was a company that I wanted to work for. And that felt really important. And I felt able to turn down a job offer from the other company because I was like, I don't want to work for you. So how do you succeed in necessarily a sector that isn't the most diverse of sectors? I think you work for a company that you know that you can work for, and that culture is really, really important. And touching on what Andy said, the biggest question that you ask yourself is, how do I want to live? Not what do I want to do? So And that was really critical. I knew I wanted to work for a hierarchical company because I'd left the military, and quite frankly, that felt comfortable. So yeah, those have been my key things about how to succeed in a sector that isn't necessarily the most diverse.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you, Sarah. And I think that message that you've just delivered there about finding the right culture, the right fit, has been a consistent one throughout the day, and one that Jules Park Robinson certainly reinforced earlier. So thank you. Bianca, do you think that your background in culture and languages has helped you be a leader in your industry? And what did you learn from the military that you brought specifically to your leadership style?
Yeah, definitely. I think in the career that I've gone into, particularly where I deal with clients who come from a variety of countries, cultures, backgrounds, even though our coverage model is based here in London and in the UK, we do have a lot of clients from a variety of places who invest with us. And so, yeah, that previous experience has been invaluable, because the experience that I gained in terms of, finding common ground or being able to speak to someone potentially in a language that is more familiar to them than English, if that's not their mother tongue, it always breaks down barriers, and it definitely can be a great start to a relationship, even if it's not the basis for the relationship. So definitely, I would say in my particular career, but I think it's applicable in a variety of situations, that has been really helpful. I think it also speaks to what I said about one of the key leadership traits that I think is really important in terms of emotional intelligence. I think putting your team first and the kind of moral component of a team in front of sometimes being really task focused, because in a corporate commercial environment, people can tend to be very, very task focused. They are subject matter experts in sometimes very particular technical fields, and they can maybe sometimes lose sight of bigger pictures or a more strategic outlook. And I think definitely that's something that we are taught from day one in terms of the military leadership training that we have received. Hannah mentioned it when she spoke that, maybe even if your particular experience in the military with leadership training hasn't been the best, you have received some kind of formal training, and that is very rare among your contemporaries when you're working in the corporate world. And that is something that you really, can rely on, and it will be there in the form of muscle memory that maybe you don't even realize that is there. And you'll see a variety of situations, or you'll be put into situations, and you will notice sometimes that you will react differently to those things than people around you, and that really is a strength. I think that a lot of I work for Citi, which is a great company to work for, and I think in terms of the big bad banks and that kind of aspect of corporate world, actually Citi is one of the, even though it's a rubbish word, nicer places to work. These companies do have, they want to say that they invest in people and that people are their focus and talent is their focus, but they still do sometimes lack in actually investing in people's, leadership training. People will get promoted to positions of responsibility where maybe there are 10s, 20s, hundreds of people working for them, and they haven't had direct leadership experience. And having people, like the people on this call with that experience in their teams is invaluable.
Brilliant, thank you, Bianca. I spoke with the Rear Admiral a few weeks ago, who's on the board of a big national charity, and he said that he realised that he had about 3 years worth of leadership training in his time in the Navy, whereas his colleagues who were all on the board had about 3 weeks worth of training. And I think that's something that we all perhaps undervalue as military people. The leadership training is fantastic and second to none. Well, thank you all so much, ladies. I'm afraid we're out of time, but thank you so much for your insights today. It's been really great.
This afternoon, I'm pleased to be joined by the fabulous Sarah Austin, Jo Swinhoe, Anna Kirkin, and Sarah Streeter. And ladies, it's now over to you to introduce yourselves. Could you please tell us a little bit about who you are, who you're representing today, and a little bit about your background? If I can start with Susanna, please.
Hi, it's Susanna here. Very nice to see you all. Yes, so my name's Susanna Streeter. I am currently Senior Investment and Markets Analyst for Hargreaves Lansdown, but I spent 17 years as a presenter for the BBC as a business presenter. But before that, I also spent 9 years as an officer in the RAF Reserve, and I left after I achieved the rank of squadron leader, and I led the forces combat camera team, or as we called it back then in the early days, mobile news team on exercises and operations around the world. So I very much, at the beginning of my broadcasting career, had a kind of dual role. I was both in the armed forces and was deployed very frequently, but also I was a civilian journalist and roving reporter and presenter. So I can kind of offer perspectives on the use of reserve forces and what they can add to employers, and also kind of how I've used my experience to transition to 2 different careers.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Susanna. And over to you, Sarah.
So I'm Sarah Austin. I'm the Chief Exec of Integrated and Specialist Medicine at Guy's and St Thomas's. What that means, we're a very large NHS organisation, the biggest in the country. We're divided into a 4-group structure, each of one headed up by one of me. So the group I head up is about 7,000, nearly 8,000 staff and about $500 million. But I'm really here representing the wider NHS, my wonderful organisation that I've been part of for 44 years. Yes, I did start as a baby, starting as a student nurse and doing lots of different variety of clinical and non-clinical roles ever since. And here to promote that it's not only a brilliant place for women, but an exceptional place for our armed forces family as well. Thank you.
Super. Thanks so much, Sarah. And over to you, Anna.
Hi there, everyone. So my name's Anna Kirkin. I was a Royal Engineer officer in the regular army until about 4 years ago. I'm on the webinar today to talk about my current role, which is as a firefighter in Devon and Somerset Fire and Rescue Service. Aside from being a firefighter, I'm also an Army reservist, so I transferred from the regular army to the Army Reserve, and I've been doing that for the last 4 or 5 years. I also do some self-employed work as a high-risk advisor or hostile environments awareness trainer. So I can certainly contribute to the conversation on self-employment and kind of having a flexible work-life balance.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Anna. And I don't know whether we've been joined by Jo, but we'll try and connect up with her a little bit later on. So first of all, what I'd like to ask you is one question to each of you in turn, if possible. And that is, what drove you into your different sector roles? And what is your why? Let's start with Susanna.
So what drove me into journalism initially is I wanted to travel the world and report on what I saw. I'd always been very interested in journalism, but early on in my journalistic career, I was on a Partnership for Peace exercise because I was reporting on it as a radio journalist. And I kind of suddenly thought, I've actually gone into the wrong career. I really want to actually join up as in the Air Force instead, but very quickly realized that I could be a reservist and kind of have a dual career. And part of my why all the way through my career has been communicating. That's really been the fundamental driving force of my career, why I've wanted to go into various different arenas. So I wanted to communicate as a journalist, but very quickly in the Royal Air Force, after I joined up as an air traffic controller, I realized my skills of communication could be very much used to communicate to Strike Command what was happening on the ground, various different operations and exercises around the world. So there again, it was my communication skills that were seized on, and I could really use those. And now I've moved into financial services. It is again my ability to communicate that has allowed me to gain this role as Senior Investment and Markets Analyst, because I very much communicate to the media about stock market movements. So I think, you know, communication is my why, but my experience in the Royal Air Force and effectively being deployed as a reserve into the heart of kind of operations on exercises and having to keep up with the regular forces as soon as you arrive has really helped me adjust to new careers and situations. You need to do that as a journalist on any story, but also in covering fast-moving financial events like I'm doing now, that has also equipped me with the ability to do that. So it's kind of all interlinked, really, I would say, my career path.
Super, and it's been a hugely varied one. Thanks, Susanna. Over to you, Sarah.
I was just thinking it's too long to remember why I went in the first place. But now that I recall, I actually started nursing when I was not quite 17, because back 400 years ago with Nightingale and all the rest of it, you were allowed to start before you were 18. So that shows you quite how long ago it was. And I think probably the overriding driver was to leave home. And there may be some common factors with colleagues from the armed forces in that regard, but for me that was a big driver. I wanted my independence. I wanted to strike out on my own. Although, to be fair, going from home to a nurse's home when you're still not quite 17, with the senior nursing officer keeping an eye on your every movement, and we had a rule. I can always remember my father found it a bit strange that you were not allowed, you know, if you had a visitor in your room, all 4 feet had to be on the floor at the same time. And as you will know, it's still possible to get up to mischief, although obviously not with my father, but even if 4 feet are on the ground at the same time. But anyway, it was a bit of a home from home, but actually you had a huge amount of independence. But the first part of my career, the first third quarter of my career was nursing. And if you cut me through, you'll find a nurse. So give me any excuse to get out in the wards, surround myself by clinicians, and I'm in my happy zone. I absolutely love it. And so much of this will be familiar. I should have mentioned I'm a member of the Armed Forces family. So although I'm NHS through and through, my other half is a veteran of the Royal Corps of Signals. So I kind of I have a bit of foot in both worlds in a way, but the sense of team, the sense of mission is, I think, what does it for me about the NHS. You know, it doesn't matter. I've done so many different roles in the NHS, from clinical through to commercial, strategy, ops, and now, you know, chief exec. I've taught. I was a teacher for 4 years, a nurse teacher. So lots and lots of different roles. But the one thing that just keeps you there is this sense of team, this sense of mission. And that you're all there for the same reason. Sometimes you can't always see it, of course, but fundamentally you're there for the front line, you're there for the patient, and that sense of community. And I do feel like I've been in a family for 44 years, and that's why I've kept here. But also the variety of roles is so immense. So although I've been in the NHS 44 years and everyone thinks, oh, you know, you must be bored by now, I haven't been in the same sort of role for more than a few years at a time. So I've only been in this organisation 2 years, but my previous organisation was 9 years down in Portsmouth. And in that time, I think I did 4 different roles. So you just have that immense opportunity to move and have variety and even have a bit of a portfolio and a bit of this and a bit of that. And there's just endless opportunity, yet within a common sense of purpose. And can't get better than that, really.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Sarah. I think everyone will be wanting to join the NHS after this, after that. Anna, over to you.
I'm really positive about the fire service, but I'm not sure I'm as effusive as Sarah is about the NHS, but don't take that as a negative piece. So what drove me into the sector? There was a bit of a push, or I'd say there was a bit of a desire to leave the army and move on from being a staff officer. So that was one of my main motivations, was that reluctance to kind of accept the inevitable career path or the career trajectory that you may find yourself on. And many of our peers will have stayed in for various reasons, such as boarding school allowance or a particular milestone in terms of pension or promotion. I was single and didn't have any of those great, opportunities, but also some of those commitments that prevented me from moving on. So I took a leap because I wanted to go into something to do with the emergency services. I've always had an interest in medicine, couldn't really afford to go back to uni and be a doctor, looked at being a paramedic, and I thought, well, I've still got some physical drive in me to do a practical job. So the fire service seemed like a good fit. When I initially looked at the fire service, I wanted to be in the southwest of the UK, and none of the southwestern kind of county fire and rescue services were recruiting at the time for whole-time firefighters. So what I did was I joined as an on-call firefighter. So I was at a retained station where you basically have a pager. You fill in an online kind of timetable to say when you're going to be available. And then if your alerter, your pager goes off, then you dash into the station and you respond to all sorts of different fire and rescue emergencies. Like I say, it was kind of a bit of an altruistic element of me. I thought I can bring some transferable skills to the party. I was really looking for something that involved teamwork. Much like Sarah, I wanted some variety to my role, so a bit of unpredictability that comes with dealing with people who are unwell or who've come across some misfortune. And I also thought that I liked the kind of small team dimension, so everyone contributing to get often quite a practical job done. So whilst no one who's been in the armed forces or had any exposure to the armed forces will have any issue with it, you know, there is a physical requirement involved in joining the fire service and in maintaining your skills. There's quite a lot of lugging heavy stuff around, and I just thought I can physically do this, and it's a physical challenge as well as an intellectual and a bit of a moral challenge as well. So those were my main drivers, really.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Anna. So I'm going to start with a couple of individual questions, if that's okay. And Susanna, I'll come to you first. As we've seen recently, those working in the media are often exposed to hostile environments. And with many prominent female correspondents currently, how have you used your skills and military background to adapt to your various roles? And what areas do you recommend our delegates consider that may not be so well advertised?
Well, first of all, I can certainly say that when I did my hostile environment training that Anna is well aware about because she leads it, I certainly had a bit of a head start, because a lot of what journalists are taught really comes from that military background and that knowledge. And so certainly I did find that slightly easier and slightly less traumatic than some of my colleagues did, because so much we'd kind of been prepped for it. I've been prepped for certainly going off on exercises and operations while I was in the Royal Air Force. But more than that, it is that ability to just move at a moment's notice and get yourself together. You don't know where you're going. You don't know what situation you're going to land in. You don't know necessarily, you have to prepare for the worst. And there's a lot of hurrying up and waiting for something to happen. So all of those kind of things you have to get used to when you're in the services certainly does happen in journalism a lot, particularly if you are sent to some more hostile environments. But not just that, even one of the times I was reporting on a football team reaching a final, and suddenly the mood changed and it became extremely hostile. All of those kind of training that you've had in terms of crowd control and ensuring that you diffuse situations and you're good at communication again, all those kind of come to the fore. So certainly I would say that my military background and experience has helped me in all sorts of ways. But then when you move on to try and move into another career, and I think I have done that because I've moved from a career in journalism, which I had spent for 17 years, to really kind of a change of career, which is financial services. And many people, when I told them I was making that move, they said, God, that's quite daunting. I mean, even though I covered financial services and the world of finance in my role as a business journalist, it's a different thing when you become the analyst and the expert. But the experience, and I did allude to it earlier, of being a reservist and being kind of effectively thrown in at the deep end and having to get up to speed extremely quickly really has equipped me with that ability to ease into my new role quite quickly. And I think it took some, like my manager, by surprise that I just hit the ground running. but you've been used to doing that all the way through your career, you know, as a reservist as well. So that really has helped, I think, with transition. I think that's a skill that I didn't really realize where that came from, but when I reflect on it, not everybody can do that. And actually, that's a real plus, I think, if you've been in the military and had that experience, that you have to be prepared for any eventuality. So when you are faced with an uncertain situation and a new career change, I think you can adapt to it quite quickly. I don't know whether, you know, Anna found from going from one environment to another, because of the situation you've been in throughout your career, it's probably easier perhaps than some people who've had to transfer from one job to another. So that certainly helped me.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Susanna. And over to you, Sarah. What has been your experience working alongside the armed forces in the NHS, both veterans and serving? And how is the NHS tapping into talent? And what does that relationship look like for the future?
Thank you. So I was thinking back to when I first worked with colleagues who were actively serving, and that was down at the Royal Hospital Haslar, which was the tri-service Haslar down in Gosport on the south coast. So I've worked clinically with colleagues who are in currently serving, the same at Queen Alexandra Hospital. Of course, subsequently worked particularly non-clinically with the wider armed forces family, whether it's spouses or partners or veterans. And then just thinking more recently, and a little bit of something to make you smile, we were privileged to have 2 MACA teams over here during the winter, during wave 4 of the pandemic. And of course, they've been active generally out and about, whether it's vaccinations or just generally helping out in the organisation. But I was particularly keen to see teams front facing. So we had 2 teams in the emergency department. Now, it was a bit mean in retrospect, so led by clinicians, but nonetheless, the others were REME. So wonderful, wonderful lady who I said, you know, how are you feeling? Are you okay? You know, you're in the middle of a chaotic emergency department. Is everything all right? She said, Sarah, it's all right. It's like it's another mission. I said, what do you do normally? She said, well, I repair vehicles and I generally, you know, get equipment done. I'm an engineer. And I went, so how does it feel? And she said, it's great, it's fine, but I'm not great with blood. At which point I thought this could be interesting. But you know, I just said to her, the key is to put yourself on the floor before you fall down. Everything else will be fine after that. And she absolutely maxed it. And that for me kind of crystallizes what it is that's so brilliant to work with either serving personnel or the wider military family. It's the talent, the flexibility, the utter commitment, this sense of being on mission, standing. I mean, this was a youngster, for goodness sake, you know, in the middle of, it's right over there, my emergency department. So I think those are the skills that are most valued in the NHS. And everyone thinks the NHS is just about clinicians, and clearly it isn't. So just a little bit of background here. So we've got a recruitment crisis. We've got to recover our position post-pandemic. We've got to clear a massive backlog, and we do not have enough boots on the ground. And by boots, I mean a variety of different roles, and I'll cover a few of those in a minute. The NHS itself can seem like a massive barrier. I mean, where do you start with the NHS? It's not one thing, is it? It's many, many small parts, and not all of them look remotely like one another. So it can be a bit of a barrier, and very often you'll see NHS adverts that say, we need NHS experience. I would suggest you try and ignore those, really, because it's time we probably learned that that isn't the answer. But nonetheless, looking for an organisation that is actively recruiting from the armed forces community is a good place to start. And there are plenty of organisations that have got quite big armed forces programmes, armed forces networks, armed forces leads. Guy's and St Thomas is one of those. That might be a bit big and a bit scary and a bit kind of, oh my goodness, in the middle of London anyway. But Portsmouth, Queen Alexandra Hospital, it's one of the original Ministry of Defence hospital units, like Frimley. You'll find more people wandering around in uniform than you'd probably find in any other walk of civilian life, and they're all in there, so you feel like you're at home. So find an organisation that looks military friendly, and there you'll find that you can get over this barrier of getting into the NHS, and NHS jobs is, you know, another big barrier. I did a quick recce. So of the 38 women in the Armed Forces network here, so we've got many, many more women who are part of the wider family, but not all of them are in the network. We did a quick recce on the roles that they've got. So obviously there's me as the wider Armed Forces family. We've got program and project managers, strategy and development, doctors and consultants, obviously, security and site maintenance, patient experience, hospitality, recruitment, HR, quality, diversity, inclusion, very senior officer from the RAF in there, communications and IT. I mean, wow, all under the NHS banner. So that's still that sense of mission, but that level of variety. Just as a note, www.healthcareers.nhs.uk tells you about the 350 different roles available. Absolutely amazing. Of course, there's also military step into health as well. So this extraordinary variety of different roles and a huge amount of respect that you probably wouldn't be expecting. So we had I'll probably get this title wrong, so forgive me, commanding officer from Sandhurst spoke to a room of my very senior doctors and senior clinicians about leadership. And you'd think, oh, really, you know? I've never seen them so still and so quiet. And the feedback afterwards was extraordinary, that they were absorbing this rich, extraordinary experience of individuals who've served and literally taking in word for word the learning that came from that individual. Well, I would say that's how I feel about working alongside our Armed Forces family. That rich experience that I've never had, that brings something to this workplace and many others in the NHS that is second to none. You won't get that from a civilian recruit, however hard you try. So however big the barriers, we really need you guys. So please do come and join.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Sarah. And it's great to hear about so many different opportunities that are available within the NHS that possibly wouldn't be as naturally thought of as we look at sort of roles in that sector. So Anna, over to you then. Traditionally, the blue light services have attracted and pulled members of the armed forces community into them. But what can the fire service do to engage with talent from the reserves, veterans and spouses communities? And how might they engage differently with each cohort?
So in thinking about this, clearly I'm representing, or I'm currently serving in a single fire and rescue service, and it's just worth pointing out just that the differences, just very briefly, because I appreciate that as a uniform service, some people will draw many parallels between the military, the three armed services, and the emergency services. And I'll come on to just say, obviously answer the question fully. One of the things it's perhaps easy to take for granted being in the military is just the resourcing. Sometimes it can appear to be a little bit limited, but when you move into the public sector in either a county kind of size organisation or a regional organisation, clearly there's going to be significantly less funding. Clearly, proportionately, it may be just the same, but it's just worth noting that there isn't always a kind of national approach to things. In the fire service, how does that manifest itself? Well, the National Fire Chiefs Council gives some direction, and some of the operational guidance is delivered straight from the NFCC. It is possible to look at how the different fire and rescue services are performing across the country, which might lead someone to base their choice on geography as opposed to the specific nature of the role, by going on to the Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabularies and Fire and Rescue Services, bit of a tongue tie, and those inspection reports will give some of the inspection reports about how that particular fire and rescue service has performed. So just trying to illustrate the point that there are some similarities definitely in terms of some of the standardizations, the nature of training, the nature of the job being we're preparing for an emergency or an operational eventuality. There are some parallels, but certainly the kind of funding and the scope of the organisation, it's just worth pointing out that difference. Another difference I'll just briefly highlight is that of representative bodies and their input. So anyone who's been associated with the military knows that largely to deal with issues, we use the chain of command, don't we? And we have a complaints process, an agreements process. We have administrative kind of disciplinary process as well. In the fire service, just takes a little bit of getting used to the fact that you have representative bodies, not just the Fire Brigades Union, the FBU, but there are other organisations as well. So you don't necessarily get things resolved in a way that you may have come to expect working in the military. All of that leads on then really to answering that question about what can the different fire and rescue services do to engage with the military community, because we're this huge resource that they can tap into, you know, regular reserve, veterans, spouses, and we've all got such a lot to offer in terms of transferable skills and transferable behaviours that can really add a lot of value to the fire service. Whether that particular fire and rescue service is receptive to that will vary according to sometimes personality and sometimes geography, in my experience. But you can, there are often many opportunities to use those skills and behaviours that you've developed in your military previous life, or if you're a spouse or a veteran, maybe from your civilian career. I think I'll just highlight very briefly, so you can go down the whole time firefighter kind of career path, which involves you working a shift pattern. Most fire and rescue services do a 2 day shifts followed by 2 night shifts and effectively have 4 days off, even if that first day or so might be spent sleeping. So you're on that kind of 4 on 4 off pattern. Some of them are looking at a different way of managing that, maybe doing a 24-hour shift followed by 72 hours off. But the majority are on the 4 on 4 off. So that offers loads of opportunities to people who, and I should say that the shifts are normally, a day shift is 9 hours and a night shift would be 15 hours. So if you have childcare responsibilities, you have your own business, you're a military reservist, it does offer a lot of opportunities to balance, kind of juggle lots and lots of balls at the same time. Equally, where I think the fire and rescue services could really engage with is with the community fire stations, which are mostly on-call or retained fire stations. If you join as a retained firefighter, you are directly helping your own community. You could be responding to a fire in your next door neighbour's house, and it could be that you take on a 30-hour-a-week contract or a 120-hour-a-week contract. They do try to be very, very flexible to be able to recruit new firefighters, men, women, young, old. There's no limit on age. All it's based on when you apply is being able to pass the practical test, the physical test, the online kind of verbal reasoning. So I think that is a great area for development for the fire and rescue services. I'll just finish by saying not all fire services have signed up to the Armed Forces Covenant. I was speaking to a colleague in Greater Manchester Fire Service the other day, who's also an Army reservist at the same unit as me, and he was telling me that he's recently drafted an Armed Forces policy for his fire service. So I'm now working with him to do the same for mine, because again, I can only speak based on the fire service I'm currently serving in, but it's not necessarily terribly helpful if you're asking to do something with your Army Reserve unit, for example, and people are just not aware of what that is. They don't know whether they should give you time off, whether they can do. So if you can just come up with a policy for that service, I'm very, very happy to help out anyone who's maybe about to start off in the fire service, and that's something we can look at doing, and maybe making it widespread. If every fire service in the country is signed up to something like that, I think it'd be really constructive.
Super, thanks so much, Anna. Oh, sorry, Susanna.
About if anybody wants to look for a career in broadcasting, that perhaps it might be overlooked because there would be concerns that it's so hard to get into and the skills aren't transferable. But as far as television production is concerned, there are a whole array of jobs. Production coordinator, you have to be, really clued into logistics, have high organizational skills. And there is a shortage of actually production coordinators across the TV industry. And I was talking to the Chief Financial Officer of ITV just about what the armed forces can bring. And I think, there is still some industries need to wake up to that and perhaps forge more partnerships. But if you went onto the Royal Television Society website, the RTS website, and look at opportunities for new entrants into broadcasting, there's a whole array of links that you can find, and getting involved in those organizations, you would be able to find some pathways, because I know that there is a shortage of skilled television operatives, and it certainly shouldn't be discounted, and it's a very rewarding career.
Super, thanks so much, Susanna. That was really helpful, and actually great to hear about how people can access roles in broadcasting and television as well, which I know can sometimes be quite elusive. So unfortunately, we are out of time today, ladies. So it's only my job to now say thank you so much for your time this afternoon. It's been lovely to have you.